Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to Worth It Then, Worth It Now. An ongoing side project I do here on this channel where I have a look at games of yesteryear. Specifically, we've been looking at 10 years plus removed, and where possible I line it up with a sale. So today, we're looking at Lords of the Fallen, or 2014 I guess it was rebranded. They did a remake slash pseudo sequel just called Lords of the Fallen, I think in 2022, a couple of years ago, which was great. And this is also great. This gets actually a lot of negative reviews. It's still sitting on mixed, and as long as it's existed, it's kind of had a little bit of negative fanfare around it, which boggles my mind personally. I have very fond memories of this. I played it on launch, probably on whatever PlayStation was out at the time, the 3 or the 4 or whatever. And I just really like it. It's a different Souls-like. It was probably one of the first Souls-likes that wasn't made under the Dark Souls banner, actually turning it into a lesser series and more a genre. And nowadays, look at what we've got. Every second man is making a Souls-like of some sort. So look, I thought curiously I'd dip in and have a look at some of the reviews, and the resounding sentiment seems to be that the game is, well, easier Dark Souls, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's probably a good way to sell it. I'm sure there are plenty of people that bounce off of Dark Souls being so obtuse and not really hand-holding. I wouldn't say this holds your hand, but yeah, I could see it being a bit easier, sure. But the complaint that seems to come through a lot is how slow and clunky it is, and this is what I'll say to that. There is a difference between clunky in a poor design sense, right? As in there's something broken, janky, that sort of thing. This game is very clearly, very deliberately trying to make your character a slow and lumbering. Even if you're not in heavy armor, you're supposed to still be a bit of a juggernaut dude. So much so that, like, you open up, you essentially choose between 3 classes. This time around, I kind of went a caster, which is not normally me. I'm usually much more of a brawler. But the 3 are, your brawler type, your more sneaky stealth type, I suppose, and then this caster. But even in those archetypes, the caster is a cleric, right? Medium armor, but it's still really plate. It's medium plate in a way. The spells take a really long time to channel, and like I'm leaning into a shield and hammer combo going into 2-hand, and look, I'm actually really enjoying it. I never played this class. I don't really play spellcasters much in games, but I've been dipping my toe in some of these revisits into that sort of thing. I guess before I lose the thread, my point is, it's not that it's slow and clunky because it's poorly designed. It's because it's clearly designed in that way with a developer intent. And I can't help but wonder, it maybe gives a bit of a peek into the hardcore Souls-like community. And I wouldn't necessarily call myself hardcore, but I play often in a Souls-like game like a very low armor, almost naked, rolling around kind of dude, living in the iframes. Dare I say, a much faster build. And I think that's what a lot of people do. And, when you get into that get good skill conversation in Souls-likes, that's where a lot of that ego seems to live, is in the iframes. Like, a lot of people don't sword and board and just play chip damage, or at least the vocal ones on the internet. I wonder if almost a majority of people that just are quiet normies and play Souls-likes just play sword and board and heavy armor. I'm not sure. Anyway, so my point is, if you consider yourself a bit of a sweatlord that writes walls of text about Souls theory, you probably won't like this. But if you're a normie, kind of like me, this might actually be a hidden gem for you, because it does lean into that juggernaut, slow, lumbering archetype, regardless of which subclass you pick. Anyway, so yeah, I've ducked back in for a bit of B-roll, and it holds up outrageously well. Like, let's just assume you can reconcile that it's slower by developer intent. Beyond that, like, the graphics are actually outrageous for a, 12-year-old game. It's really pretty. Makes me want to go back to the newer Lords of the Fallen, which we streamed a chunk of. We did a bit of a playthrough of this a few years back as well, I think in preparation for the new Lords of the Fallen. And there's a second one coming out, I guess a third one, a sequel to 2022, and the devs are very active on social media, and that's looking very cool, and it is leaning into my kind of game, all right? A lot of titillation, a a lot of blood and gore and cool animations. It's looking like a good project. So in my opinion, these guys, CI Games, have nailed all of the releases, and including this one, which you may have slept on, you may have seen negative reviews, but give it a couple of dollars and a couple of hours, and I think you'll find this game absolutely slaps. The setting it's not so clear. However, funnily enough, listening to it this time around, it's starting to fill in a few gaps, a few questions that I've had across multiple games. I believe the next game, the remaster, is still sort of a sequel, but it's one of those set 1,000 years later, which honestly, as a side, whenever these fantasy games do that, that makes me roll my eyes, right? Making a sequel in the same universe 1,000 years later, like, why don't you just put it in a World War II equivalent or an Industrial Revolution? 1,000 years is a long time. It feels like they refuse to let go of their world setting, and yet they want to build something in a different world setting. So I'm like, well, why do these sequels? They're not the only company, but it comes up. I think Divinity's doing it, actually. Anyway, that aside, they briefly discussed the Lords of the Fallen. I think the Fallen might be like a god that they worship. Not clear. Again, this was a very early proto Souls-like, on the back of the trend, let's make our own one. So it's taken certain learnings, for example, that mystique riddled storytelling that the Souls-like series is known for. In this case, though, it presents a bit more disjointed. There's an opening cutscene which is pretty badass, where your dude shows off his powers and fights this big monster and that, and then it cuts to, in a different time, in a different battle, is the cryptic text on the screen, and now you're the main dude, but in different armor, seemingly depowered, with an escort. They briefly cover that you've been sprung from prison to get to the bottom of this mystery, but it feels disjointed, right? And it's less, if I were to speculate, it's less intentionally so and more, hey, let's make a badass trailer and try and stitch it together with the game, even though it's got nothing to do with the game. But it might as well, because it was set in the snow, but anyway, my point is, the storytelling is trying to emulate a muddled, meandering Souls-like mystique, but I do feel it drops the ball a bit there, and instead of being, clever little snippets, which you don't have to like the Souls-like storytelling, but and I will agree, it grinds on me at some time. Like, if I'm into a game, I'd rather just understand it, as opposed to making me go look up Vati video videos for 20 hours to figure out what the bloody hell's going on. But the craft is still fairly solid in the Souls-like games, right? It's made with intent. They clearly have people on their team that, when they give you these tiny snippets of lore, it is all part of a greater whole. Whereas I feel like these guys kind of just copied the wrong elements. Let's obfuscate stuff for the sake of obfuscation, and it makes for, it's less frustrating and more, I'm not engaging with your story, if that makes sense. It might seem like such a small thing, but giving me a paper trail of breadcrumbs to generate intrigue and curiosity in the player is different from just leaving chunks out of it whole cloth that confuses the player. And again, I'd be curious to go back to their newer one, the 2022 release, which broadly was well received, and I remember really enjoying it. But I wonder if their storytelling technique was tightened up in it, because if you ask me what was going on in that game, I can't remember either, and I put quite a few hours into it. Anyway, Lords of the Fallen, the black sheep of the series seemingly, but it's going for a couple of dollars, and it holds up incredibly well. I think if you earnestly engage with it as the developer intended, which is clearly to be a much more slow, lumbering, plate-mailed dude, regardless of whether you're in heavy, medium, or light armor, then you will have a much more fun game. But if you're trying to make it play a certain way that you play the 7 Dark Souls games back to back to back, and because it won't cater to your specific build, and that makes you angry, you'd probably best stay in your lane and leave this game alone, because it's doing its own thing. And I personally appreciate it. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.